welcome back to the slate. We have a very exciting session for you right now. I am Elise Roth. I'm a senior editor here at Backstage, and we are sitting down right now with there are so many superlatives, casting director, Carmen Cuba. We're very excited to have her. We're going to talk about Stranger Things, but we could also sit here for the whole hour and name all of her credits. So we might get into a few other of her projects too. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you put it in the chat, I won't see it, we won't see it. And people have sent in some great questions already, so we'll get to some of those too, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. But to start out with, I think, everyone has been handling this quarantine a little bit differently, and have you still been able to work during this? Have you been, can people send in self-tapes? Is casting still going for you?
Yeah, I, on the front end of the sheltering at home, I continued work on season 4 of Stranger Things, mostly because they were kid roles, which are sort of the easiest thing to do from home because everyone's self-taping. That process involves self-taping in the first round anyway. So I continued that for a while, and then we went on hiatus. Let me turn that off. We went on hiatus for that one, and then funny enough, I did another kid search for a movie, and then things started ramping up. New projects that wanted to get going came, and then also my projects from before started ramping up because I like to say that casting, especially during this time, is sort of the fantasy area where we're all pretending like things are gonna hopefully be normal soon. And I honestly have no idea if they are or aren't, but I'm happy to sort of play along and do what I can. And agents and actors all seem very motivated to engage. So yeah, it's happening. It's pretty busy, I have to say. I'm just doing my best to try to keep the balance of not allowing my former sort of level of hecticness overtake the fact that I have 2 teenage boys at home for the summer who can't leave the house and need to also sort of be paid attention to.
Yeah, lots of navigating new situations for everyone. But I think it's interesting to hear that a lot of the news is everything's shut down, nothing's happening, but there are some things happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And people, the good news too is that, it's not a surprise, I'm sure, but that everybody really wants to find the way to make this happen in a safe manner. And so a lot of the calls are also just about how are we going to do it? Because I'm the translator to the agents and to the actors of, what our plans are for moving forward too. So it's been a lot of that. That's been an added thing on top of my work, as well as sort of trying to figure out the logistics of how we move ahead.
Yeah, definitely a figuring out type of thing, since there's no blueprint for it. But we are here to talk about Stranger Things, and since there's a lot to talk about, I'm going to start kind of general, and then we'll get into some of the details. I'm going to say at the beginning, for people watching, our readers absolutely love the show, and it's very clear whenever we publish anything about it. But we're not going to be talking about season 4, and we cannot give any details away. So if that's what you're here for, we cannot do that. But there's a lot to cover with your job in the first 3 seasons. And generally, when you think about, you introduce basically a whole cast of young actors to viewers who are now very familiar with them and anxiously await their return every new season. So can you talk a little bit about how your job as a casting director on the show, how your responsibilities have kind of evolved over the course of your time on the show?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the first season of the show, the casting for that was super low pressure because we sort of barely knew about Netflix. Nobody knew about the Duffers. We worked together on their first film. I can't remember how, like maybe 6 years prior to that, and we'd become friends. So I'd sort of followed their journey, and they wrote this thing, and they'd had it for a while, and sort of nobody was engaging with it. I had even sent it to producer friends who didn't want to come on board, who are now very upset that they didn't listen to my suggestion. And so when we were actually casting it, we had a lot of freedom. We had a lot of support and freedom for all of those reasons. And so, you know, the other thing about that is that I have kids who are the same age as the characters. So at the time, I was very deeply entrenched in what it meant to be a kid that age, and who, you know, sort of the authenticity of it versus what we normally see in kid acting. And certainly up until that point, I think now it's expanded and there's a more naturalistic sort of approach to kid acting that you see in many other things. But anyway, so I am always very committed to authenticity, and that was just how we approached these kids. We just wanted them to feel like people who happened to be whatever ages they were at the time. I can't even remember. Were they 11, 10, 11? They were 11 and 12 maybe. Anyway, so we did the normal thing. We decided actually pretty early on, because I also come from a background where I've done a lot of non-actor kid and teenage casting, but we determined together early on, the Duffers and I, that this was not going to be a kid we found, you know, at a drugstore eating ice cream. It wasn't going to be someone we scouted that had no experience. We sort of wanted to know that they had the kind of experience, even if it was just one time being on a set, but actually performing a role, the kind of experience that this was going to require, honestly, and that the way that these guys direct would require. So it did turn out that, you know, all of the kids had at least one sort of guest star job under their belt, or Broadway, or starred on Broadway. So they were all, you know, they were all perfect for what we needed of them and for the roles.
Yeah, because that's not always the case, where sometimes you do have the opportunity to, you know, find someone and say, it's okay that you've never stepped foot on a set before, we'll make it through. You know, there's...
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of that, I don't know how much people know about that, but a lot of it has to do with budget restraints, which cause time restraints, and child labor laws. So these are things that we really, really have to take into consideration. And sort of a more experienced director can work faster with kids. Sometimes that doesn't play into it at all, that their experience helps them work faster. But so the Duffers are they're very sort of logical as well as inventive, and so we were able to sort of know what was going to work best for what they had to accomplish. And also, you know, you sort of make these decisions ahead of time, but you don't know that the kids you are going to end up loving are going to have any experience. It could have been that they had none. It's just that it did affect our search, in that we weren't doing sort of open calls out in the world, getting scouted, you know, scouting people. We knew that it would come through agencies and managers and acting teachers and, you know, people like that.
Yeah, people who have
actively, kids and families, because it also has everything to do with the families. Kids and families that were actively pursuing this as a career.
Right, that makes sense. And you mentioned before that kids casting usually takes place on tape first. Was that the case with this too?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. At that point, for sure. I mean, that's increased over the years, and certainly now in COVID, that's all there is. But the yeah, I think because the first round, also because you're getting them from all over the world. You know, Finn came from Canada. The two, Caleb and Noah, came from New York. Millie came from London. Trying to think, in the semifinal, like sort of in the semifinal group, there were some kids from LA, but mostly they are from all over the place. So even back then, a lot of it already was, you know, self-tapes and then Skypes where I speak to them first to get to know them, and then I can sort of talk to the duffers about them as people, and then we get the duffers with them, and then maybe we have them do more material, and it definitely is a different process depending on who the directors are.
That makes sense. And so the next, I think, in my head, correct me if I'm wrong, like hurdle kind of generally is you have this great cast that everyone falls in love with, and the next season you have to introduce more main characters. So when you're adding to the cast like that and they're supposed to, you know, merge and meld into the ensemble, what are your considerations? What do you have to think about?
Well, that's certainly different with every project, but for Stranger Things, it was bananas because those kids had become, first of all, because the show was so huge and so well loved and widely received, and then also because the kids became so famous, it's sort of elevated, even if you can't separate the fame that the kids attained from the show. So it sort of made you feel like you needed to find someone who, I've never really said this out loud or thought about it, but almost that could be as famous, could sort of live in that fame themselves because they were clearly going to be thrust into it. So on that side, there's that. But then really the part that we really focused on is they just needed to be as good as the kids were because those kids were amazing. And another interesting hurdle, which wasn't a hurdle for me, but there was some, or from the Duffers, but there was in sort of the circle around us, there were certainly famous people who were reaching out wanting to offer themselves to be on the show. And so that is something that I you know, it's very exciting when a famous person says, I'll do your show, like a person who isn't even doing TV yet says like, I'll do anything. But so that became a hurdle for us because we wanted to keep the show feeling authentic to what it was. And if you were to sort of lose yourself and get super excited and put someone that didn't make sense in it, it would be pretty obvious, I think, what you were doing. So we had to practice restraint and still really look for that authenticity that made the original cast work and the uniqueness. I mean, the thing about that original cast is that they're all really, really individuals. None of those kids even cross over into the same space as another, energetically, emotionally, you know, any of it. And so then to add, and there's a lot of them, so then to add to that and to find more sort of singular types was challenging. But I do always go back to the writing of the show, and the truth is that the writing helps in lots of ways because the writing is just so strong.
Yeah, when you say that all of these cast members are so, you know, they're so singular and they work very well together. When you're casting, is that something that was that part of, you know, the breakdown in your conversations with the Duffer Brothers, or was that kind of just these people became clear that they were right for the role, and it all happened to be that they were these individuals?
Well, what's interesting is they first did material that wasn't even from Stranger Things. I think it was from Stand By Me that they did scenes from. So, and they were all reading the same thing. So that actually was helpful in sort of seeing how different they all were. We didn't actively talk about it, but that's just something inherent to, I think, what casting directors do in general, because no one is happy when they look at sort of their cast and people feel the same as each other. I don't think, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but also, you know, the Duffers are identical twin brothers, yet are completely different from each other. And so I think that we just exist in this space where it wouldn't have made sense if anyone was, unless it was written that way and intentional. But we didn't talk about it, but it was clear that that's what we were looking for. But then we also got really lucky in that that's what these kids were, because you can also have characters that are written differently from each other, and then it feels like you have different actors, not just because their roles are so different, but the truth is that the inherent difference in them is what I think is part of the magic of that show.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, I think everyone can kind of see a version or some part of themselves, whether it's the child version or, even current version of themselves in it, because there's something for everyone. And when I don't know if you think this way as a casting director, but you're casting a TV show, there is always the potential for there to be more. I don't know if this is something that was, on your mind when you were casting, but especially when it's kids, it's like, if it is going to continue, then they're going to grow up. Is that something that you have to think about when you're doing this type of assignment?
I will definitely say that when we were casting the kids, that in those sort of final talks, there was definitely a conversation about what they were going to look like when they grew up, which I thought was so fascinating, because again, I have my own children. I'd never really engaged in that kind of, I really come from features. So I think I can't remember how many TV shows I'd done, maybe not that many before Stranger Things. And so even the idea, there's so much about a series anyway, that at that point was like, I had to just pretend like it was a movie. But yeah, we definitely had those conversations, and I just thought that was, it's kind of absurd to sort of, like, I don't even know what that means, to sort of project ahead, and are they going to be a heartthrob? Are they not going to be a heartthrob? Like, that stuff is so weird to think about kids anyway. I can't look at my own kids and figure out what they're going to look like or be like. But, those kind of things, definitely some people in those groups are bound to bring up those kind of things. But it didn't like affect who we cast or not.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when you are, there's obviously the adult component, and there were a lot of recognizable faces in the adult part of the cast, but so much of what grounds the show, or I guess the foundation of the show, is this cast of young actors. So you mentioned that these were not going to be necessarily people that you walked up to on the street and said, have you ever thought about doing TV? But how do you know that someone is going to be able to, support the lead? Like, what in your audition process, I guess, is the real question that kind of ensures that these people can, take on these roles that weren't just like one line and they were in the background of a scene?
I will admit, at least for myself, it's a gamble, I mean, you don't know. You're just sort of putting together these. I think for me, it's really instinctual, and I do more than just audition with material. I do spend time talking to them. I talk to their parents. I'm speaking of just kids in this case, but even with adults, I do personal interviews with these people and with actors, and sort of try to figure out for myself. I was a journalist first, so I guess in some way that's natural to me. And I'm just have a huge curiosity about humans anyway. And the thing that I see as one of the most important aspects of my job is the marrying of the director who has to work with the actor to the actor. And even if an actor is brilliant at the material, I still have to figure out sort of as much as I can about their energy, their sort of how they might be on a set kind of thing, without asking like, how are you on a set? And match it to the way that the director of that specific project works. So I feel like I gather various kinds of information, and then I just hope that it works. And sometimes it is for me at least, it's a thing where sometimes you really are convincing people of something that you have no evidence of. I could talk about Ms.America, like Tracy Ullman. That was a big convincing thing, which everyone is very happy about. But once everyone agreed, I came home and was like, oh my God, like I really know she can do it, but I hope she can do it, because I've just sort of convinced all these people. And I watch dailies, and I stay in very close contact with the directors through the process, just at that point it becomes for my own peace of mind, because once I see them shooting and I see that it's working, and once the directors text me and say, oh my God, it's perfect, or she's amazing, then I'm like, all right, my job is done. But it is stressful. You are really spending a lot of your time vouching for these people who you don't know yourself, And at this point, there's so many actors that I've worked with auditioning for years, and I do have a sense of them, and I've watched tons of their work. But with kids, I had only seen the work that they did and what they did for us, and you just have to trust. Sometimes believing in those people also helps to create for them the ability to succeed. So it's really, we're all working in this thing together.
Yeah, I think that's encouraging too, because everyone has to start somewhere, and especially if you're a young actor, it's like there's only so much you could have done in your life because there's not that many years. So yeah. I imagine that it probably means a lot to have someone on the casting side saying, I see this in you and I want you to do it. And I do also, so you had mentioned that you hadn't done a ton of TV before you took on this project, and now you just mentioned Ms.America. You've done so much TV, and while you also somehow still are doing lots of movies. But the lines are a little bit more blurred now than they were even 10 or 15 years ago between the two. But there clearly was something in TV that, you wanted to keep coming back. So what does draw you to a project? What makes you want to lend your casting talents to something?
I guess the lines were blurred for me in TV because the directors that I was working with in features started doing TV. So that's how I came. Honestly, even at the time that I started looking was my first TV series, I think. Was it? Well, I think it was, but even at that time, however long ago that was, there was a distinction, not only for actors between doing TV versus film, but also for casting directors. I was not invited to do TV until I guess I did Behind the Candelabra first, which was a movie for TV with a director that I've worked with in features for 20 years. And so all of a sudden HBO knew me and I won an Emmy for that. And so, it became this thing where HBO knew me and loved me and wanted to work with me. So then they gave me the opportunity to do looking. And the experience casting TV versus film is also completely different. The process is very different. Contracts are different, everything. So they were amazing with me, and they paired me with a producer who understood I hadn't done it, and they sort of all trained me on the job. But I would say that most of the TV I've done, and this is still the case, comes from the directors that I work with, and it's just, I would do whatever they were doing. I would do a short film. If Alex Garland was doing a short film or a music video and he wanted me to do it, I would do it. It just happens that he's doing TV because he's also being welcome in a different way now, because now, directors can write and direct all of their episodes of a season, and so it's all just changed. I wouldn't say, I almost can't think of any show that is of mine that fits the more traditional TV model. But I hope that answered your question. Sorry for that.
Yeah, no, that was great. And before we go to audience questions in a minute, the last thing I want to ask you is just kind of, between Stranger Things, but I think that's not unique to Stranger Things, that you have introduced audiences to people and actors that they probably hadn't seen before, or maybe hadn't seen in a lead role before. And I think that's kind of, you do such a variety of projects that there's not really like a through line. All of your cast looks super different, and it's really refreshing. But that's something that they do have in common, is that there's this kind of theme of getting introduced to new faces. So when you're not, just getting submissions from agents, and especially you mentioned, doing a kid search for a movie, where do you look, and, maybe where are some fun places that you've found people, maybe not that you've actually cast, but that you've invited to go to an audition?
Again, I think because I started out as a journalist, I'm very curious about humans, and so I'm constantly reading things, and my family makes fun of me because if I read something in the New York Times about the first African-American dancer in the Joffrey Ballet, I'm making it up, but something like that, then usually the following week I go into my office and I say, hey, can you see if she'll Skype with me? So then I'm Skyping with all these random people, with biologists, with, just people who interest me. And things come out of that. Janet Mock was just a writer when I was casting Sense8, and she was a writer who I followed, and I really was impressed by her. And so I asked her, I had never met her, but when I was casting Sense8, I reached out to her and I said, hey, you've never acted, but would you be interested in trying out for this? And I sort of paired her with this acting coach in New York City, and she did one session with him, and he was like, she's a natural, and she auditioned, and it came down to her and Jamie Clayton in the end. And to be honest, Jamie was amazing, but Janet also would not have ever, with all her multiple careers, been available for a long-term series. But so there's that. I often ask actor friends who work in theater for when I have breakdowns, I often send them to them for theater actors who don't have agents, who I should know about. I reach out to theater schools, to alumni. I have Heidi Marshall is an acting coach in New York City, and she actually was a casting scout for the original cast of Rent. So she has a real special eye, and she's someone who I reach out to often, because I definitely do want to try to access people who don't yet have agents. But it's also, you know, it's challenging. I mean, we post on Actors Access and things that reach these people, but I also want to somehow be able to be more specific. And if I reach out to these friends of mine in theater, I usually get really fantastic responses, and always like super talented people who should be represented. And I follow them, you know, it's like, and then once I've seen them once, I sort of keep them in my records and go back to them and really try to pursue that.
Yeah, it's always encouraging, I think, to hear straight from a casting director that they will remember you just because, you know, you didn't get a part, or maybe you didn't get called in for an audition because you weren't quite right. That doesn't mean that you're just never gonna, you know, cross your path again.
I also have favorite casting directors who I steal from, who do their own work. You know, like anytime I see an Ellen Lewis film, I am so amazed that she finds these people I've never seen. Lorraine Mayfield, also Nina Gold. You know, those are people that when I see their work, I'm always slightly jealous, and then I take what I can from them, from projects.
Well, I think that actors are probably happy to hear that is the type of stealing you're doing, because that means more work for them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna start moving into some reader questions. Again, just to repeat, if you put the question in the chat, I won't see it, so put it into the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. But a question I thought was interesting, for those of you who don't know, Stranger Things films in Atlanta, but Carmen is based in LA. And so someone asked, how do you cast local hires outside of LA, and do you work with the Atlanta casting office?
Yes, so I do work with Feldstein Paris in Atlanta, and they're fantastic. I work with local casting teams everywhere. So, and the beauty of, or the sort of secret of my success is that I have a brilliant casting team in my own office. And so we have a process, they're very organized, and we have a very distinct process that that alters a little bit depending on what the project is, but certainly for Stranger Things, we have a real system. And the Tara and Chase, we work very closely with them, and then everything goes through me. I sort of I narrow things down, and then I present to the Duffers, and the Duffers and I go over everything. But yeah, we really have that one down to a system, and we keep finding great talent in Atlanta. And also, if there's certain parts that we know might be challenging to find in Atlanta, so we look simultaneously. And I mean, even like Joe Keery in season 1 came from, I think we got him through local casting, even though he was in Chicago. So we all sort of, you know, we cover territories.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of an impossible question to answer, but as much as you can approximate, is there like a number or like a type of role that you're kind of looking for locally, and then versus casting out of LA?
I would say, generally speaking, most recurring guest stars come from LA, but we have found more and more that we can find talent for guest star roles in Atlanta as well. So I think that's actually just evolved. And it depends on, I guess it depends on the material too, and sort of the impact that we're looking for from a guest star. Like if it's someone that could be a more known entity, then I just look for it. But I don't know if that's a specific answer, but for sure day players. My feeling always is, and I don't know if this is a popular thing to say or not, is that Atlanta in general just has so much work that if I was an actor starting out, I would go to Atlanta. But that's also because nothing that I do ever shoots in LA. So I actually don't know the LA day player community as much as I do the Atlanta and the New York one, for sure, because that's where my stuff shoots.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I think definitely another big change that we've seen in the last 10 or 15 years, that now there's a ton of stuff that's shooting out of Atlanta, and I know that casting office is also very busy.
They're very busy, yeah.
And at a certain point, they're going to need more actors because,
Yeah, it feels like they're getting more and more actors. Even the Duffers said it, because we had started casting season 4, and they were like, where were these people last season? And that it's exciting to see new people who are really great.
And you mentioned how you have a great team, and I think it's maybe it's not obvious, but you do so many projects that it would be impossible for you to do them by yourself. Someone asked, can you kind of describe, between you and associates and assistants, what that kind of looks like and who does what?
Yeah, so each of my projects has an associate and an assistant. In my office, I have 2 associates who have worked for me for one has been with me for 7 years, I think, and the other's around 5 or 6. They're professionals. They're really, really organized. They know how to communicate the things that need to be communicated with regard to organization and structure. And okay, well, let's see, how does it work? It's different. It's hard to explain. I guess that I am the one that has the sort of big creative conversations with the creators, in this case with the Duffer Brothers and with Netflix. And they make everything sort of happen, that has to happen logistically. They do, but it's so much more than just the idea of that they do paperwork. Charlie Metagovich, who is my associate on Stranger Things, contracts have changed over the years at Netflix. SAG contracts have been renegotiated and they become one thing and they change into another, and how we pay people has changed, and she really has a great brain for that, and she handles the sort of making of the offers on the day player and guest star parts, and I sort of only have to get involved when they're more complicated, but she really is fantastic about that, and again about sort of keeping me organized, and so each project has its own team, and so the way that I can sort of do all these things is that they are organized among themselves, and then they sort of, I miss these days now, they sort of parade into my office in very scheduled ways to sort of have me answer all the questions that have to be answered, and then they move on, and then the next one comes in, and it really, really has freed me up to really be my most creative self, and they know how I work, and they know what interests me and what definitely doesn't interest me about the sort of day-to-day stuff. And I'm part of the reason I can be so, for sure the reason I can be so busy is because they're so amazing, but also I feel a real responsibility to them for keeping them engaged and giving them projects that I think are challenging for them, and that they will grow from and learn from, and you know, be interested in. We have we have a very good sort of community. My little team. Everyone's really smart and really dedicated. And the other thing that they're good at, also because we've been together for so long, is, you know, reminding me of actors who I like the theater people that are not represented, and people who I've liked for other things, and they have great ideas of their own as well, for sure.
Yeah, I think kind of a little bit of that story, it's important to remember that there's casting directors there's so many responsibilities, and some of them are those logistical aspects. And I think people might not know or forget that you're not just sitting in a room all day looking at self-tapes and auditions and choosing, you know, who you like for a part. Are a lot of other aspects that go into securing someone for a role.
Yeah, and the value when someone hires me on their project, it's not just me that they're getting this team that is so experienced and, you know, can talk to you about contracts again, and can talk to you about scheduling in unusual ways, because we've done every version of every, again, not traditional television show. And so really it isn't just me at all.
And I've seen a few questions. You had mentioned before that even just for Stranger Things, you looked far outside of LA, outside of the US, and there are a few people who ask, especially as a young actor, how does someone from the UK or how does someone from Canada get on your radar? How do you find out about those people?
Again, because I watch a lot of stuff outside of American content, but also we release it on Spotlight over there. We go out specifically we go out to specific agents. I think pretty much everyone know, and same in you know, we know which agents to send to in Australia and New Zealand. Oftentimes I hire local people there who will do it. It's all different versions. It depends on the budget and the range and the extent of the search. But I think just everyone is connected online now, you know. It's,
yes.
Even on Spotlight, it's also not represented actors too. So it really does covers a lot of ground.
Right. And they're also, I mean, for obvious reasons right now, but there's a lot of questions about self-tapes. And you also before had mentioned that a lot of your kids' casting comes through self-tapes, and especially if you're looking at people from out of town, out of the country, that's going to be the thing. It's a vague question because it's kind of like just asking, what do you look for in an actor? But are there any suggestions or, you know, maybe don'ts that you suggest for people if they're, you know, new to self-taping or just haven't, you know,
I think the bottom line is that if a performance is great, then nothing matters, and it is pretty clear. I could say things like, you know, don't like come up with some stunty kind of thing, but then you look at like Dacre Montgomery's audition for Billy on season 2, and he's like topless with sunglasses on and dancing to this music, which normally I would say like don't do that, but it was amazing and it was totally worked with the character, you know, but also his performance was fantastic, so it was undeniable. I think if he had done that and his performance was terrible, I would have been like he really shouldn't have done that dancing thing at the beginning, you know. So but things that I appreciate about actors who really move me on self-tape is and now on Zoom, excuse me, is considering the depth of field of the camera and actually like being able to come in closer and further away, as opposed to moving this way, which I think maybe you do in a room more because also there's people here and so you're not trying to come. But I think that there's a real power in a self-tape when you use the space between the camera and sort of where you would normally stand, because it's really engaging and it sort of takes away from the stuff you can't do maybe outside of the scope of the thing. So that's something. And, you know, blank wall behind you if possible so that I'm not distracted trying to see what books you have on your bookshelf or food in your kitchen. But even if that's not possible, which I understand in many cases, it's not, like, that's not that big of a deal.
Right. As a casting director, you know how to look for a performance in a...
Yeah, and also, you know, most of the time after a self-tape, the next step is seeing you in person in a non-COVID world. But also, even if the next step isn't in person, I can give you notes for, if I know a director that is going to see this does get distracted by that kind of stuff, then I will usually have the person do it again and then give them actual notes and fix whatever was in the background, or, you know. My job is to create the best piece of material to present to the director in the way that I know the director will respond to it.
Right. Well, that kind of answered I was going to ask, in a non-COVID world, what someone might expect from, you know, a time when they're stepping into your audition room. So people can expect for you to have kind of you're not just going to sit there and say, okay, that's it, and not interact. People can expect that.
No, I definitely interact because I don't, I'm trying to think. I don't want everyone to expect that I interact with everyone so that if they come in and I don't interact with them, some things don't require me to sort of engage in that way. And certainly at different stages, I might not do that. But when we get to, and also now I'm also thinking, like, it doesn't always mean if I'm engaging in a conversation that you're at a certain stage either. It's just sort of, there's no rhyme or reason for how I do any of it. And some days I just want to engage with a person, and some days I just have so much to do that I can't, you know, and in that case, if that person does go on further in the process, then I will engage at a later time, or, you know, in a Skype, or so. Yeah,
the bottom line is, don't read too much into anything that does or does not happen in the audition room.
Definitely not. I will say that when I'm auditioning, you know, because there are days I audition and days I don't. And the days that I audition, when I come home, my kids have always been able to tell that I've auditioned that day. And I think that that's a testament to how much I actually do engage with the actor, even if I'm not talking to them. Like, there's a real energetic connection, because I genuinely feel very, this sounds so, I don't know what, but I'm just going to say, I feel honored that people will come into my office and give of themselves in that way, and be vulnerable, be open. I always am so, I'm not a brave person in that way. Like, even this is, I'm just trying to pretend is not happening as it's happening. But you know, like, I am amazed at actors and how brave they are. And so at the end of the day, when I'm auditioning, you know, I really have been present. I have been present for them, and I have engaged with them, even if it's not in sort of a personal dialogue. Like, I really want to be there for them and help them get the best of themselves on tape. And that takes energy and effort.
Well, that might be the answer to this question. Someone asked, what don't actors understand about the casting process? But I guess also, have you ever heard anything that someone has said and said, oh, that's completely wrong, I had no idea that they interpreted it this way?
What do you mean? About their experience?
You know, what you do as a casting director, or, you know, their interpretation of one side of an audition versus what's actually happening on the other side of the table?
Well, because it is an emotionally based situation, there definitely are times when people feel like it hasn't gone well, and I feel like it did. And that's just, you know, it's a fragile thing that actors are doing and putting themselves out there. And there's sort of, I think maybe some actors can connect to how the truth of what happened in the room, and then, but that even seems like it would be a hard thing to do. But some actors, you know, it just depends. Like if they're very connected to the part and they just feel like they didn't get what they wanted as far as a response from me. I know sometimes I'm also misread because, and actor friends of mine have told me this, that I think that sometimes my reputation precedes me, right? So they walk in and they're scared. They think like I'm more important than I actually am when it's just the two of us. And so they work themselves up. And, you know, there's so much that goes into, well, any human interaction and how we perceive it. But certainly in this case, you know, I'm sure we all have different versions of what happens in those auditions, you know, but mostly I will say that mostly the people that come into audition for me at this point where so much is self-taping, they're all amazing. So it isn't like not good, not good, not good, great. It's really actually like great, great, great. Now, which one's great for the director? Which one's great for the role? You know, like I really rarely see an actor in person who I don't feel has just done an amazing job for me.
And someone wants to know, do you find that self-tapes are more difficult to cast off of than actually being in a room with actors?
Well, I don't know that I would ever, I'm sure I have done it, but I wouldn't just cast off of tape. That would just be, but if you mean like for the first impression, I actually think self-tapes might be better than the in-person first impression. I don't know why, but maybe just for me, because it removes that sort of personal anxiety about like, oh, I'm in the room with her, or me feeling that person's anxiety and trying to make them feel better, and like that adjustment, which by the way can also be helpful sometimes in an audition. So I'm not saying that those things are bad, because I also, actors are so amazing at being able to work with their nerves and the energy of the moment. But I think self-tapes really sort of narrow the playing field. And I also will say that I have way more people self-tape than I ever used to see in person, obviously, because you don't have that amount of time. And so it allows me to explore things and types and ideas that I really wouldn't do in person just for lack of time.
Yeah. Someone asked a kind of technical question about a self-tape. Where do you want people to look? I guess if you have a reader, you know, do you look in the camera? Where do you look?
I would look at the reader, and the reader should just be a little bit to the side of the camera. And also, I mean, we're saying it on ours. I'm sure everyone is saying the same thing, like during this period specifically, but I think also anytime, it's better to have a good reader. It's better to have no reader than a bad reader. So you can say your own lines and pretend that someone's saying the other lines. You can record the other lines and work with that. But a bad reader is really distracting, we'll say. So that does become our hurdle. And that really the other person shouldn't be acting. unless they are an actor and it's your, you know, your Rose Byrne and Bobby Cannavale is reading for you on the other side. But mostly the reader should just sort of be facilitating the reading.
Okay, and we have a couple minutes left, so maybe just one or two questions. On the other side of things, there have been a few questions about what you suggest people do if they want to get into casting.
That's a good question. So the entry level job in casting is a casting assistant, but the problem with that being the entry level job is that you sort of have to have already done it to know the process, and nobody that I mean, maybe people hire people who haven't had experience, but there are various, there are various programs that are paid internships that then place you with casting offices. And if you're still in school, you can do internships via your school. We always have an intern every whatever season. But the TV Academy has an internship. The Film Academy has an internship. The Casting Society of America has an internship. And these are all great programs that are giving people, you know, casting is a finite job in that you start with a script with no parts and you end up having cast every part that speaks. And so all the logistics, all the paperwork, everything in between, it changes every week. So having been through that process as an intern at least once, you know what it is. Because I think unless you've done that, you really think it's sort of, I'm auditioning people and they're in the movie. So I would look into those programs for sure.
And you also said before that even if you do want to stay on the acting side of things, that it's helpful to work in a casting office just to see how it runs. And you said like being a reader is a good way for an actor to kind of see the other side of things. In your experience, I guess what kind of feedback have you gotten from people? Like, why is that a helpful thing based on what people have told you?
I think that it's helpful because you see how random it actually all is, and certainly if you have the experience of being in the room with a director and a casting director, you really see how it's like any other relationship. It's just the two people and what they respond to. It's not like, again, it's like I said earlier, it's not the person who does the material the best. It's the person who matches the kind of director, you know, David Fincher does 200 takes. So is this someone who can do 200 takes? Steven Soderbergh does 2 takes. So that's an entirely, I mean, there are actors who could do both things, but there are certain actors who could not do both things. And so, you know, I think if you're in those rooms and you're getting to hear, it's way more about the discussions that you're hearing, because you see then that, like, you know, it really has so much more. There's so many talented people. And like I said, like, they just can't all get the job, and there has to be these sort of defining things that get you the job, and so few of them have to do with you yourself and what you did in that room.
Right. Again, I think it's always reassuring to hear that that's actually the case directly from a casting director. And I think that is a good place to stop. Thank you so much for taking so much time to talk all about Stranger Things, give some advice. I mean, we could sit here for hours and get all of your expertise, but we can let you go back to your very busy day, filling lots of great projects with great actors. Thanks everyone for watching. This will go up on YouTube at some point in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be back tomorrow with more program on the slate. Thank you again, Carmen. Thanks everyone, and stay healthy. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.